excited to introduce Jay to the Men's Group community here. A lot of the guys in the Men's Group community, our members anyways, already know Jay because he's actually one of our facilitators and coaches in Men's Group. And Jay, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a mindset emotional resilience coach, and I've kind of been in the world of men for probably about 3.5 years now. I actually started in the world of men with my own men's group. I remember my first ever men's group. I was terrified that no one was actually going to turn up, and I had 6 guys sat in an in-person men's group, and I remember walking in and sitting down, and every single guy looked like he wanted to murder me because I was about to get him to talk about his feelings. And I remember facilitating my first ever men's group and just realizing how much men needed the level of support that we were offering through these men's groups. I'd never run one before. I thought, hey, we need this, so I run it, but I only really got how much men valued it when they kept on coming back week in, week out, and actually started to trust me a little bit more as a facilitator and started to open up before eventually Sean approached me. COVID happened. Offline men's groups were kind of shut down, and Sean jumped at the opportunity. And then he asked me to come on board as a men's facilitator here. But I'd been coaching for about 2.5 years, men specifically, and now I coach women as well, but men primarily, to deal with both the mental and emotional challenges that they face fundamentally in business and in life as well.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Jay. And it's been so good and nice getting to know you and watching you grow as a coach and as a facilitator. And I've seen you in so many groups now. We've been in groups together. And so I was excited to have you share some wisdom with the guys because I know firsthand that you have a good take on life, a healthy take on life. First of all, I'm sure people are wondering, like, what have you learned about men since that first men's group? Like women especially would probably be wondering, what have you learned about men? What areas do they typically need support? Just any general takeaways around men.
Women have a tendency to treat men like hairy women, and men have a tendency to treat women like hairless men. And one of the big things that I noticed is that we definitely communicate differently. Men, like I always give this example of, if you ask a guy how he shops, if a guy needs a t-shirt, the guy goes, problem, I need a t-shirt. So when he goes shopping, he goes, t-shirt, need to find a t-shirt. So he walks into the shop, he looks for the t-shirt, whether it be black or white, or maybe he'll go, I need a t-shirt, there's a t-shirt, is it in my size? I'm probably going to take one of each. I'm going to try one on, and I'm going to go and buy that t-shirt, and I'm done. Whereas women, they tend to, from my experience, they go in and they caress the clothes and they say things like, oh, this one's nice. And as a guy, you go, something she likes. She's found the prey. And you say something along the lines of, well, why don't you try it on? And they go, nah, I'm good. And they move on to the next way, and they're caressing their way around the store. And you always see the guys who are trailing behind their partners like the world it's like the end of the world, because their soul is dying, walking around, caressing clothes. And then you walk out the shop and they say stuff like, there was nothing in there. And as a guy, you're like so confused, like, what the hell just happened? And one of the big things I've realized about men is typically, and it's slightly different between different men, but men typically hunt. We see problem, we see prey, and we go kill. Like, it's very direct, it's very straightforward a lot of the time. We typically have an idea of what we want, and when we do know what we want, we go for it. Whereas women, I find, it's a very different, and I think it comes from this hunter-gatherer mentality. The hunter, man, target, prey, problem, kill. Whereas women, it's a bit more like, hey, I'm going to gather. I'm going to touch things. I'm going to mingle around. I'm going to try different things on, when they often don't make a decision. But that can be a real positive thing if you find yourself in a relationship. And I think, especially in men, one of the most empowering things I've learned is that, yes, my wife doesn't make decisions. She has lots of ideas. She caresses lots of clothes. She has loads of ideas that she brings to the table. But I have the ability, which she doesn't because she's often caught up in her emotion, to just cut through and just help her. And that is really refreshing for her. So that's one big difference that I've discovered about men and women fundamentally. I've also discovered that for a lot of guys, it's not easy to talk about what's real. I think we live in a culture today where, and I think it's getting better with the new younger generation, it's definitely improving. But I think that for so many men,
Yep.
they don't want to admit to themselves that they need help, or they don't want to ask for help. And then when they eventually do, that's still a huge step, because I think especially men need to trust someone if they're going to open up their heart and be vulnerable. And that takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say those are two of the biggest things that I've learned about men and women specifically. I could reel off a whole list, but those are the two immediate ones that come to mind in how we communicate, how we do things. But also, if you're asking men to open up and talk about what's going on with them, just know that sometimes they just don't know what they feel, so they don't know how to communicate it. And sometimes it's going to take time to build the trust to actually get them to open up and be vulnerable, because in my experience, so many men, and women included, this is not to discredit women, so many men have been ridiculed or hurt or have wounds around other experiences that they've had with young boys or as men. I know that was certainly the case for me.
Me too. Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, is you mentioned trust so much, and it's like that's a word that I see come up in men's group a lot. And I'm like, why do you think guys, it takes them so long to trust people to share the sensitive stuff with? But you just answered it, it's because guys are ridiculed since they were young for sharing that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame. So there's an identity that we have around men. Like, I can give the example of my dad. My dad was a really hard up, traditional masculine male, if you like. And to give you context, when his father passed away, I remember on the day of the funeral, my dad turned around to me and he said, I hope I don't make a fool of myself. And I said, what do you mean, Dad? He said, I hope I don't cry. And I turned around to him and was like, Dad, it's your dad's funeral. Like, no one's going to ridicule, no one's going to laugh at you for showing your emotion. And if anything, it's your body's way of actually helping you to heal and release that. It's naturally wants to come out. It's your body's natural instinct to do that. And that was just a classic example of how my dad had been conditioned, but also how he brought me up as well. He fathered in the way that he was fathered.
Yes.
And so it was almost made wrong to show weakness or my emotions. But the other side of this is, because that was the identity that I needed to keep, I was also never taught how to express my needs, how to express my emotions, other than maybe some anger, which was quite often one that my dad was quick to. And so certain emotions were okay, according to my dad, but then I never got guidance or support on how to actually express the other emotions, because he wasn't taught either. And I'm not in any way saying, hey, my dad's this, my dad's that. It's just taking that understanding of so many generations before us have actually been taught that this is the way a man is. And because of that, I think a lot of men find it difficult to really open up and talk about what's real, what's going on for them.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of, like, my dad didn't have the opportunity to, or the luxury to process his feelings, or didn't have to, there was no tools, there was no training for that. But more importantly, like, he grew up in a family of 11 kids, and his dad grew up and working on the coal mines when he was 12 and set out for a new life on his own when he was 15, because life was so horrible in Ireland. He had to go and start a new life in Canada when he was 15. So, like, a guy that has faced that kind of hardship, and I imagine before that it was like the war generation, a lot of sacrifice in Europe around World War II, and then before that, it's World War I and the Great Depression. So it's like I could see why our parents don't have that toolkit, that emotional ability that we wish they had, and then we adopt that as well. But it doesn't mean that it's healthy, right?
Oh no, absolutely, and it's really sad actually, because one of the things I see is a lot of male pride in my father. And it's almost like that stiff upper lip. I can soldier on, I can be tough, but as he's getting older and as he's progressing through his life, it's getting harder to keep up that facade, because what he's experiencing in his life is leaking out everywhere. And it is really sad, because I, as his son, have the ability to support him with those emotions, but he's not always open to accepting help from me. I used to try and change him. I remember when I got into the world of developing myself, personal development, I got my big personal development stick, and I was like, hey, everybody needs to know this shit. And I was like beating everyone over the head with it. And the fact was, people didn't want to change. They might have seemed unhappy in what they were, but that was just their way of connecting. So they connected through their moaning a lot of the time. But I seen that being the man. I was like, hey, problem, fix. And I think a lot of men will be able to relate that in different areas of their life as well.
Yeah, especially with parents. That's something that's come up a few times lately in men's group, is guys are like, my parents, they're living like this, and I see how they could be happier if they lived like that. And one wise old mentor of mine, an older guy that I look up to, he said, there's this whole study in psychology called family constellations, and it's basically like there's certain dynamics of certain types of communication that work in going up in generations or down, and like teaching and support usually goes down, right? Parents teach the kids. Mm-hmm. And so often when, especially between boys and their fathers, when boys try to teach the fathers will automatically reject that. So I've run into the same thing where now I just kind of, I have a much better relationship with my father, because I've just kind of accepted he is who he is. He's going to bitch and moan about things. He's going to complain, and I can appreciate him for that,
Yeah. I learned, it's an interesting one, because I learned exactly the language you used there. Is I accepted my dad too. And what was actually happening with my dad is he was actually feeling judged. He was feeling like there was something wrong because I was trying to change him, and that's the way he was seeing it. And when I got to a place of accepting my dad and seeing him as he was, and something quite remarkable changed, because for me, I was doing Facebook Lives 5 days a week, and I was talking about emotions, I was talking about the mind, I was talking about human behavior and psychology. And as soon as I stopped trying to change my dad, something remarkable happened. Is because I was leading the way and I was sharing this stuff. Guess who was tuning into my Facebook Lives? My dad.
No way.
And he would often drop subtle hints about watching the lives, or I kind of got something from that. And that was really powerful for me, because
cool.
I realized in my own way, like, he's never really going to admit it to me that he finds it super valuable and it's changed, but something quite remarkable happened recently where I've always been trying to, like, my dad's had a tough time. He's gone through a couple of divorces, and he refused to do online dating. And I've often talked to him about it a number of different times, and he's just refused. And I've talked to him about how it makes you feel and how you can work through it, and you've got to formulate a way forward. You can't live like this forever. And then a couple of weeks ago, he actually rang me up, and it was his birthday, and he said to me, hey, I'm going on a date. And I was like, where have you met someone? And he's like, I met this woman on a dating site. And I was like, holy shit, he actually listened to me. And that was just beautiful.
Wow, awesome.
I think no one likes to see their parents unhappy, and it's a beautiful thing. And it's pretty cool.
You can make suggestions. Like if I find that if they ask you genuinely for feedback or for advice, great. That's an opportunity to do that, right? And you can also chip away at them a little bit with simple suggestions like that. Took my parents forever to get on WhatsApp. But now it's a great way for our family to communicate. It's like a group, my brother and my two parents. Now they love it. So you can have small wins like that, right? But trying to get to change how they live or how they think about the world. It's I've wasted so much energy and caused so much drama doing that. Similarly with you with the big personal development stick, trying to whack everybody around me. When in reality, if I just change myself, they usually follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Because eventually they'll
man.
start trying to teach you. Oh, have you seen this thing on WhatsApp? This new thing, and you'll be like, it's not really new, but I'll let them have their moment.
Oh, it's so infuriating with family and people too, because like they will hear somebody else say the same thing you've been telling them for 10 years, and they'll bring it back to you like it's new information, and you'll be like, I don't know, you probably had that happen too.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, they're brilliant.
They just need to hear from their friend, not from their son, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to get in the concept of mastery, because it's something you talk about a lot. And something I don't think about too much is mastery. It's a word that's used a lot. A lot of men are confused by what it means. You specialize in emotional and mindset mastery for men. Why mastery? What does it mean?
Yeah, so mastery is sometimes a little bit of a buzzword that's kind of bartered around. And I think first and foremost, I'm going to say that for me to be masterful over something is to be dedicated to mastering a skill, a way of being, and that sounds a little bit woo, but mastery, let's use a skill, mastery of a skill. So mastery of a skill is to do things like communication. We could all benefit from becoming more masterful in our communication, whether that be with ourselves, in our relationships, in our work. And for me personally, being able to master something is really to do things without thinking. It's unconscious, but you do it in the word that's coming to mind is eloquent and skilled way. It's not something that you're consciously having to think about. It just comes out of you. And because you've done it so many times, because you've improved and you've looked at what worked and what didn't work, then it seems to just come out of you. And I give a great example of this. If you think about Tony Robbins, so some guys in the men's group community might be familiar with Tony Robbins. You could say he's probably one of the best personal performance coaches in the world, works with US presidents and many different people. Some people love him, some people hate him. It's good marketing, actually. And
yeah, totally. Yeah.
One of the things I see with him, and it's almost like the iceberg effect. I look at him and he is a master of being able to tell stories, to coach people through their challenges. And he can do it almost seamlessly. And people are like, oh my God, he coached someone through depression in seconds. That was unbelievable. And people are going wild for it. And it's easy to look at him and go, wow, if he can do it, he made it look so easy. I can do it.
Yeah.
But the reality is, like an iceberg, people only see the bit at the top. They don't see the tens of thousands. I mean, people say 10,000 hours leads to mastery. I don't think that's entirely true. I've spent a lot of time wasting time on lots of useless shit, which haven't resulted in me mastering it. But there's this whole load of work and effort that's gone into that skill, and people always just see the tip of the iceberg. And to be able to reach that level, you might think, oh, he's just figured it out. He just woke up one day and he's got it. But actually, he's been doing it for like 40 years. And I remember listening to some of his recordings on one of his apps that he has. And I remember in between, he was working with his producer and he'd do a piece, and then his producer would go, oh, I think that bit would work really well there. And Tony would go, oh, no, that bit. Yeah, we could do this. We could do that. And then he'd go and tell the same piece again. And he was always just working at his craft to improve, to become better. And in my opinion, I don't believe you truly ever master something. Because to master something is to actually reach a point where you arrive and there's nothing else to learn. And I don't believe that is true. I think life is a game of trying to master living. But for some people, they tend to master certain areas. So that's really what I kind of see as mastery.
So I'd love to hear in your perspective from running men's groups and also being a men's coach, how men can master their emotions. How do men build emotional intelligence? Because a lot of men are scared to share their emotions with anybody around them. There aren't that many tools out there for men to build their emotional intelligence. So how can a man become more emotionally intelligent? How can he become better expressing, communicating, understanding his emotions?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's a massive, massive topic because there's so many factors that go into it. I think one of the biggest things I've learned through working with men, through coaching men, is that you cannot let go of that which you're not willing to feel. And for a lot of men, one of the easiest things to do is push things down, to suppress it, to not want to feel it, because certain emotions, you could say fear, anger, shame, guilt, sadness, they're uncomfortable. And what I see a lot of is that men will find many ways in order to avoid feeling the feeling. So I'll give you a specific example. My dad, always comes back to my dad. My dad struggles with loneliness.
Yes, always does. Always daddy issues, right? Yeah.
It does. My dad struggles with loneliness. So instead of being willing to feel the feeling and feel the feeling and be able to put himself in a position to actually do something about it. And I don't mean fix it. I mean being willing to feel it, be with it, and start to inquire and ask questions of like, what's the reason I feel this way? What am I doing to actually cause this in some way? Because in some way, I've caused this. I'm always causing my emotions. And a lot of that is based on how I'm perceiving my current reality. Now, that might seem like an out there world, but what my dad does is instead of feeling his loneliness and experiencing his loneliness, what he has a tendency to do is run away from it. And the way he runs away from it is he throws himself into his work. And this is true for a lot of men. And there is a good reason for that, because if you think about emotions are typically uncertain, uncomfortable, uneasy for a lot of men, especially some of the emotions that I mentioned. And that's an area of uncertainty.
Yes.
You might say that might be an area of pain. Whereas when we think about our work typically for a man is where we have competency, where we know what we're doing and we get a certain level of certainty. Some people actually meet their need for certainty by eating food because it gives them a lovely warm feeling. I remember
That's me. Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And some people, if you're really British, then you probably not so many men in men's groups, but British people might make cups of tea. I remember I went through a stage where I was actually needing to get something done and I wanted to procrastinate. And so I used to have like 15, 16 cups of tea a day. And it was just simply to avoid doing the work because it was most uncomfortable. So I used tea as a way of distracting myself from my emotions. And
or booze, drug, marijuana, you name it.
Drugs,
right?
pornography.
Pornography, that's a big one in men's group. Yeah. Women,
Absolutely.
chasing women, sex. Yeah.
Women, sex, prostitution. Women actually might use shopping. Some people might use social media. Social media is a big one in order to really distract yourself from your reality. Now, I'm not the most intelligent person in the world, but one thing I do know is that if you're going to run away from something, you're not going to be able to deal with it. And you're not going to be able to overcome that. And I think that the first thing I'm going to give you is that emotions, we cannot let go of that which we're not willing to feel. So first one, we must be willing to feel it. Second thing I'm going to give you is I think it's really important that men understand that your emotions are like a GPS. They're like a guide. They will tell you what's going on with you. And that is really valuable information that you can actually use. So if I
Yeah.
feel scared, if I feel into that, I can start to inquire and say, well, what's the reason I'm scared? What's causing this? What am I thinking about? What am I feeling anxious about? What am I catastrophizing about is going to happen in the future, which we see all of the time in men's group when people have some
Yeah.
kind of anxiety. They're thinking about all the things that could happen. And what do they say about fear? Future events appearing real, or as I like to say, fuck everything and run, because that's the way it feels. Right?
That's better. Fuck everything and run. That's great.
So be willing to feel your emotions, but also the second point I made is use them as a GPS. I think if I was to give one solid tip on getting started with emotions, is the first thing I'd say is just label them. Just be willing to say it. And you will notice that when you speak out, that's why men's groups is so powerful. When you speak out and you say, I feel guilty, I feel shame, I feel scared, I feel angry.
Anxious, tired. Yeah.
Exactly. And so
Somber.
labeling your experience and expressing it is really powerful, because I think there's two things that people typically do. They suppress it. They might suppress it. They're like, get down there, get down there, don't want to feel it. And that shows up by distraction, work, alcohol, drugs, sex, porn. That's a form of suppression, avoidance. But the other side of that is expression. So you suppress or you express. And when people express, how they feel, something changes. It's like this heavy feeling in their body all of a sudden feels lighter. And I'm sure you've probably experienced that as well, Sean.
Yeah. Oh, all the time. I see it happening in men's group from guys. They go, I didn't expect to feel this way, but just talking about it, saying it out loud, I feel lighter now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those are kind of some of the things that I'd say just to begin with, because ultimately, whatever you're getting triggered by, whatever you are experiencing, is normally the byproduct of something that's probably happened in the past, something that's happened in your life. And I can give you a really solid example of this. And this is not to go into therapy, but I'll just talk from my own experience. So when I was 3 years old, my parents got divorced. And as young children, we're very egocentric. So if you've got kids or nephews or nieces, or you just observe kids, that sounds a bit wrong. You actually, you will notice that whatever's happening, they make it all about them. So if the parents are arguing, it's their fault. They make it mean that they've done something wrong in some way. And when I was 3 years old, I wasn't really aware of this, but later on in life, I discovered that my mum had an affair. And my dad left the house. My dad moved, I think, about 1.5 miles away. Now, as a young child, all I know is my dad's there, my dad's gone. That's all I know. I don't have a logical brain that goes, oh yeah, it's divorce. It's normally things that happen in relationships. That's not how my mind was working. And what I made it mean, because we are meaning-making machines, we apply meaning to everything. What I made it mean is that my dad has left me. My dad's abandoned me. My dad doesn't love me, which then must mean that I'm not good enough. And what inevitably happens is you compensate. You compensate for that because as children, they desperately want to be loved by their parents. They want their parents' approval. They want their parents to actually care for them and make them feel safe. And so for me, how that manifests itself was, I always give the example that if you break your left leg and it causes you pain, what you tend to do is compensate by leaning on your right. And for me, one of the things I decided to do is I decided that I was going to do everything I could to be perfect. I was going to do everything I could to get people's approval, my dad's approval. And so I became what is really familiar in the men's group community, what's known as a nice guy. The book, Robert Glover, we see it all of the time. And so I was desperately seeking the approval of people. But the problem I faced is that I was insecure. I would find myself having a massive challenge with rejection, and that translated into my business, right? It's not always healthy to have a fear of rejection in my business, because there's plenty of people that are going to turn you down, who don't want to work with you. But I would always be triggered by that. And it would make me feel like this crushing shame. And anything you're experiencing is often the result of your past. Now, people always say, well, I didn't have a parents breakup, or I didn't have that go on in my life. I actually had a pretty good upbringing. And sometimes what happens is we forget.
Yep.
Because naturally the mind doesn't want to remember that pain. So because we suppress it down. And when things keep showing up in our life, it has very little to do with what's going on in front of us. It has very much more to do with something that happened in the past. And that's not always immediately obvious. And sometimes even the smallest event can have the biggest impact. Like, I remember my dad was always late for everything. He was always late. And I would be the last kid at school all of the time.
Yeah.
And constantly I was getting those feelings of abandonment, and he doesn't want me. And so my behavior as a result of that was, hey, I just want to be around people all the time. Just get me around people. And so
totally mine too.
Behaviors based on our past in order to help get our human needs met and to avoid ever feeling that pain again. So that kind of ties into the point that I was saying before about you need to be willing to feel your feelings, because they're going to act as a sat-nav. They're going to give you clues. And if you just start to ask questions about what could be the reason that I feel this way? Where does this sound or feel familiar to me? Oh yeah, this reminds me of when the kid at school picked on me. This reminds me of when my mum was this way, or my dad was this way, or my friends picked on me, or my girlfriend did this to me, my girlfriend cheated on me, or my business partner robbed all my money. There's always a clue.
Yeah, I love this so much. You're so right. The emotions are a gift in that way. That's what I've found, because they are clues to that deeper stuff that's there, whether you like it or not. And I think a lot of guys listening to this might be sitting there and going, well, I get that, but that's not me. I don't have stuff from my past. This is not our opinion. This is not Jay's. This is not your opinion, Jay, either, is it? This is clinically documented, well-researched, well-defined, that, often when we have especially when we have disproportionately large reactions to things in our lives, that's usually a clue that reminds you of something from your past that you found painful. Yeah. It's touching at that wound, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best way I describe it is, I don't know whether this ever happened to you, Sean, as a kid, but I remember when when I was young, and I go to cry into my mum. I go, I'd hurt myself. And she'd say, where does it hurt? And I go, there. And she'd go, where? And she'd push on it, right? What, there? And I'm like, get off. And I use that example because that's essentially what's happening in the mind. You've got some kind of cut on your arm, and whatever's showing up, whether it be your boss, whether it be your girlfriend, a member of your family, their response is causing you to, they're pushing on you. They're pushing on that same event that's happened many times in the past, and then you get the emotional reaction as a result.
Yeah, bang on. Are there any other tools? You mentioned the book No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, which is a book that helps guys eliminate nice guy syndrome and just set boundaries and stuff like that. But are there any other tools for men that are wanting to, or books, or low-hanging fruit that men could access that could help them become more emotionally intelligent?
The Way of the Superior Man by David Data was a fantastic book for me. But I also think if you're interested in what I'm talking about in a little bit more detail, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. That is an incredible
Great
book
book.
on trauma. And I'd probably say around trauma, people sometimes think, oh, well, I don't have that, Jay. It's not me. And I just want you to get that I used to think that trauma was sexual abuse or getting beaten to a pulp or domestic violence or something along those lines. I
Big
never
car
considered
crash or
myself.
something horrific. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and trauma can be your dog dying, your favorite dog or your
Yeah.
favorite cat. Trauma can be being left at school and being the last to be picked up. Trauma can be someone saying something bad about you in front of all of your friends and everybody just laughed at you. I had an experience, and it's quite mild, but it really did affect me. And I remember I used to have a lot of shame around this. I remember when I was a kid, I'm actually from Wales in the UK. The UK is 4 countries for all of our US friends. It's 4 countries: England,
Thank
Wales,
you.
Scotland, and Ireland. And I grew up in Wales, and so we learned how to speak Welsh. And I remember being in Welsh class, and I dropped my pencil on the floor. And I bent over to pick up my pencil, and I farted really loud. And everybody laughed. And my teacher, ridiculed me. And I just wanted the ground to, swallow me up. It was humiliating. And I remember feeling that same feeling, when I would ask a question and I ask a question and people would laugh at me. And I just felt that same
Yeah.
sensation. And so it led me to behave in a way where I just wouldn't ask questions. I just go, okay, yeah, I've got it. And they go, you sure you got it? I'd be like, yeah, because I was so terrified that if I asked the question, that people would laugh at me or it would be wrong. And so
Yes.
trauma is something that can be really mild and not something you normally associate to being trauma. I think it's really important that I share that.
Yeah, and the jury's out on this. It's been documented for 40, 50 years now. There's no more, it's done. This is, everybody experiences this. Everybody deals with it. Most people are completely unaware that a lot of stuff that happened in the past is still running, how they're dictating their reactions in today's life. So yeah, again, if you think that it's not you, next time you get upset about something, if you sit there and breathe into it, I think you might, if you give enough time, you might actually, a memory might pop up, or maybe that flavor of that feeling might remind you of another time in your life, just like you said before, Jay. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I'd give this book as well, because we see this a lot of times in the MensGroup community. Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw. That's another good book. It's quite a lengthy one, but it's a good book. And one of the other ones I share with all of my groups is The Values Factor by John D. Martini. Because I know for a lot of guys, they reach a certain age in their life and they're wondering how the hell they ended up here, or they're lacking that direction or that purpose. And that's a fantastic book to align with what's actually most important to you. Because I find that a lot of men fall into the trap of not living their lives, but living their families' lives. And I think it's about, not about age, but about stage. And everybody goes through a certain stage where maybe they need to be there for their family and put their family first. I'm not in any way saying that's wrong. I think that at a stage, though, a lot of guys reach a point, maybe when the kids are starting to get a bit older, where they want to rediscover themselves and find that thing that really excites them or gives them that challenge or gives them that feeling of more deeper meaning and purpose. So the Values Factor is a really good book as well.
I wrote that down. I love John DeMartini. His breakthrough experience book is fantastic.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, Jay, that you touched on there quickly is nice guy syndrome. It's something that you and I both see in Men's Group a lot. You know, it's one of our best attended groups is the No More Mr. Nice Guy boundary setting, group. And I'm sure you must work with men that deal with that. What have you learned about how to be be more of a good guy and less of a nice guy?
Wow, yeah, this is again, it comes in many different varieties depending on whatever's happened in your past. And we see so many symptoms of it. We see guys who really have challenges in relationships where they're desperately trying to actually get the approval of their partner, and they're just doing and doing and doing, and they are expecting their partner to give back. But then when they don't, they resent them, and secretly they're angry at their partner for not doing the thing that they haven't communicated because they have a problem with confrontation.
Yes.
That's a big one that we see in the nice guy. In terms of how do we deal with it, I think that everything starts with awareness. Get an awareness of your behaviors. So one of the things we hear all the time in Men's Group is when guys read the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, that would probably be the first step. They actually realize, how does this guy know me so well? He's in my head. How did he know? And it sounds just like...
Yes.
You, right? If this is going out to the guys in Men's Group, they're already in Men's Group. But if it goes out beyond Men's Group, then of course that would probably be a book I recommend. And then what he recommends in the book is that you join a Men's Group like Men's Group, which is what so many of our members actually do. Coming back to the awareness thing, most guys, it can be overwhelming, I think, to try and deal with the level of problems they actually experience, because it's never just one thing. It's never just, hey, I've just got this one single thing in my relationship, because they might find that they have what's called covert contracts, or they are approval seeking, or they might have a fear of conflict. They might have quite destructive relationships. It shows up in many different ways. And what I'd say to many guys is, let's just tackle one thing at a time. So, for example, if I have a challenge with conflict, then I've got two options. I can either explore where that conflict comes from, that fear of conflict, and get to understand the root cause of that. Because when we get clarity on what the root cause of it is, what you might actually find, and I call it a charge, some of that charge is released. Because if we're just going through life and I'm like, I just don't know why I feel like this, I don't know how I feel like this, we're often confused, and that manifests in more of that same feeling. But when we get clarity on what specifically could be the root cause of it, then often what we do is we release some of that negative charge. Let's say it's guilt or shame or fear. We release some of that. Now, you can either get coaching, support to actually overcome that, whatever that past event is, or you can go the other way, which is going to take courage, which is when you start to lean into it a little bit. And just one step at a time, you maybe starting to say no to people. Maybe if it's just your kids, you start there because they're going to love you no matter what. So maybe just starting to say no to your kids. And maybe then starting, as you progress, it's going to give you more confidence. Maybe start to say no to your partner on certain things that aren't big matters that carry a lot of emotion. And I found that what happens is just by easing into it, taking one thing at a time and starting to build that confidence, it's going to help you realize that conflict can actually be a really healthy thing. Conflict can be really healthy in a relationship, because when two people experience conflict, as I always say to people, when there's breakdown, there's normally a breakthrough. And in a relationship, as an example, when two people have a confrontation, and they have the courage and the awareness to both want to talk about it, they normally talk through the problem and they find a path and a way forward. And ultimately, that elevates the relationship and the relationship improves from there. And I can talk from personal experience. That has been the case. I used to avoid conflict. I really did. I used to hate it. It would make me uncomfortable and icky, and I'd be like, oh, I don't want to be rejected. And it was horrible.
Yes.
But I knew that I had to have the courage to speak up. Because if I didn't, my relationship was going to end. It was going to end up in probably more conflict. And then
Totally.
it would end up being a relationship that neither of us would actually be fulfilled in. Whereas now, from leaning into what I just shared, and I'm using conflict specifically, like I said, there's other areas of this. That's ultimately what's allowed me and my wife to become much better at communicating with each other, much better at creating space to talk about what we actually want in the relationship. And it feels like a much safer space because we've gone there. And so that's what I'd probably say to guys with regard to nice guy, to kind of leaning into it.
Yeah, I think that's great, Jay. And in Men's Group, we see, like, I love how you pointed out that it shows up just like emotional responses. It shows up in so many different parts of life. A lot of guys struggle with it at work, with coworkers, their bosses, to set boundaries. A lot of guys struggle with it with friendships, parents as well. Like setting boundaries with family can be difficult. So I think that's fantastic. And if any guys want to learn more about it, also just Google boundaries, how to set boundaries. No More Mr. Nice Guy is a great introduction to it. But what it is it's really a book about how to set boundaries, get clear on what you want, set boundaries around that. So that's fantastic. The one last thing I want to get into with here, Jay, is mindset. You're a mindset coach. A lot of guys want to improve their mindset. What are things that guys can do to start to improve how they think? I'd love to hear some low-hanging fruit there.
Yeah, it's a good question. So mindset's often a little bit of a fluffy topic, and it feels a little bit woo at times. And
yes,
let me bring some more tangibles to it. So one of the first things I learned I trained in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. One of the first things they ever taught me was a fundamental universal principle known as cause and effect. Cause and effect. Now, let me just paint some criteria here so you can start to understand where you are in the spectrum. So when you're at the effect of things, you're at effect of your emotion, you're effect of your relationship, your boss, your kids, your family, what you actually end up doing is blaming people. So if you find yourself blaming people and going, it's their fault, they're doing this to me, then what you actually put yourself in is a position of victim. When you're in a position of victim, you feel disempowered. You feel like I cannot do anything about it. You feel helpless because now you're putting all the power in this other person, whether it be your partner, your boss, your kids, your emotions, the government, whoever else, whatever it is. You're putting the power in their hands and you're disempowering yourself to be able to do anything about it. So that's when you're at the effect of something. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, when you're at the cause of something, you are the person that is being responsible for what is showing up. You are acting out of a place of intention. You are not saying, she's doing this to me in this relationship, she's making me feel unhappy. You're actually saying to yourself, how have I made myself unhappy? Because no one can actually take a bunch of unhappiness and come and dump it in your mind. No one can do that. Yeah. No one comes with their big shovel and is like, hey, here you go, have a load of unhappiness. The only way you can really be unhappy is if you are choosing that. If you are actually deciding, hey, I'm going to stay in this relationship, even though she's abusive to me. Or even though I'm not getting my needs met in this relationship. Only you can cause that. So cause and effect. When you ask this simple question, How did I cause this? How am I responsible for this? Then what that's going to do is it's going to empower you to actually find a way out of it, whether that be through communication, whether that be through walking away, whether that be with coming up with an idea or some other solution to that challenge or problem that you experience. So fundamentally, the first simple thing I'll give you is notice where you are causing things in your life. Now, people might say, but Jay, how am I causing this? How am I causing all of this to show up in my life? What?
How did I
Someone
cause that
died?
car crash? How did I cause that girl to not text me back? How did I cause that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do I cause that? Well, I think bad things happen to good people sometimes, and some things you just cannot explain.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to stand here and say, hey, you caused that car crash, you caused that death. I think life, things we cannot explain, runs in cycles. And I think even if you look at the seasons, winter turns to spring, spring turns to summer, summer turns to autumn, autumn turns to winter. And life, the circle of life is everlasting and always continues. And so I'm not going to stand here and say, you caused that car crash and you're responsible. No. I think that there's certain things that you can control and certain things you can't. And as Viktor Frankl says in his book, another great book, Man's Search for Meaning, the last of
Yes.
the last of the known freedoms is man's ability to choose how he responds in any given moment. I'd probably bastardize that a little bit, but that's what it is. And you get to choose. You get to choose how you respond. And when you come from a place of cause, you get to choose. Hey, I can either accept this, I can either take blame for it, I can either blame somebody else, or I could ask myself a more empowering question, which is, okay, this is happening. Let's just accept it. What can I do about it? Who do I need to speak to? What action do I need to take? Where do I need to set a boundary, as Sean alluded to? And from that place, you're going to be able to create more of what you want and get less of what you don't want. So that would be one simple way to actually start shifting your mindset to be able to take back control of your life. I'll give you one more. I can always tell when people are in what I call the mind. Essentially, they're in their emotions. If you've ever met someone who's scared, they will generally say, I'm scared of everything. I'm scared. And they will use generalities. I just feel guilty. And what you actually notice is they very rarely ever give specifics. They will talk in this general terms. When people are stuck and don't know what to do, they will say, I don't know what to do. I just don't know. I'm stuck. Stuck in what? Marshmallows?
Stuck.
What are you stuck in? So what you always notice is a lack of specifics. And I feel like I've had plenty of times where I've been stuck in the emotion of it. And one of the things you can always do, and I say to my clients all of the time, when you're in the mind, you will operate in a place of generalities and you will make statements, vague, ambiguous statements. But ultimately, that never serves you. And whenever you are making those general, vague, ambiguous statements, you're at a place of the effect. You're at the effect of your emotions. You're in it. And it feels heavy. I know it feels heavy.
Yeah.
But the best way to get out of it is to get specific. And the way you get specific is you ask better questions. So instead of saying, I'm scared, acknowledge I am scared of that cat, that dog, feeling my feelings, label it. What could I do about it? What is possible? What boundary specifically do I need to set? Who do I need to have a conversation with so I feel less scared? What exercises can I do? Can I try Wim Hof breathing, for example, or do box breathing if you experience anxiety? Where can I find the answers that are going to support me in the problem that I'm facing? And when you get specific, you get clarity. I'm sure, Sean, you've experienced that time before where you've just felt either overwhelmed by the business or work or emotion, whatever it is. But when you've either got a bit of distance from it, or somebody's asked you a couple of questions, a coach or a mentor of some kind, and then you've come out of it and you've seen the light, you go, now I know what to do. And immediately you feel lighter, you feel like you can move forward and keep progressing. And so that would be my next tip. So if you find yourself feeling heavy, if you find yourself speaking in generalizations, just get specific by asking better questions, and you will find you will start to move out of it.
I've noticed that in my life, so that's a great tip. I really appreciate that. How do you guys know if they need to work on their mindset? Like we keep hearing about in the culture and society about toxic masculinity or toxic mindset and these kinds of things. How do you guys know if they need a little bit? What are the telltale signs of them needing a little polish up around their emotions and or their mindset? You know,
they're not getting the results that they want, to put it frankly. There's kind of only two fundamental reasons why problems persist. So if you're experiencing a challenge or a problem that you haven't been able to overcome, whether that's, let's just paint some pictures, you're in a relationship that you're not absolutely fulfilled by, if you are not earning the level of income that you really want, then there are only two reasons why problems tend to persist. Number one is you don't have the skill set or the information to actually resolve that problem. So if I'm trying to speak to someone who speaks Swahili, the problem I have is I don't speak Swahili. Now, no one's ever taught me how to speak Swahili, so I need to get the information on how to speak Swahili and the skill. So that's the first one. The second one is if you're experiencing some kind of emotion, fear, shame, guilt, sadness, anger, resentment, any one of them, what that's going to do is it's going to affect your thinking. I don't know whether you've ever made a decision from a place of fear or self-doubt or frustration. It's not always the best decision. And the way I like to look at it, I learned this from one of my mentors, is simply asking a question. Do you make better decisions when you're drunk or when you're sober? It's sober, right? And emotions get you high. Emotions are irrational. Emotions are like being emotionally and mentally drunk. So whenever you're operating from a place of your emotions, you make worse decisions. And I guarantee there'll be men that listen to this who maybe have gone through a breakup and they thought it might be a good idea to park outside their ex-girlfriend's house and stalk them because they're feeling some kind of emotion. Or they might have thought it was a good idea to spend all night checking through the messages on their phone just to make sure they're not cheating. Now, I'm not the most intelligent person, as I said before, but I'm smart enough to know that's probably not the best move you can probably make if you're going to build a healthy and trusting relationship.
No.
So that's what I'd say about how do you know you need to work on your mindset. If you've got a problem and you have all the information you need and you have the skills you need to solve the problem, but you're still struggling to solve it or you're experiencing some resistance, then that is a sign you need to work on your mindset.
Yeah, awesome, Jay. And lastly, coaching, like a lot of guys, when they're foreign with coaching, obviously, how I think about it is like any tool that works for you on your personal growth journey as a man, anything that can help you get into this stuff to improve your mindset, your emotions is a good thing. Obviously, men's groups are a powerful tool. Otherwise, you wouldn't be leading them. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing them. Both you and I just happened to fall into men's groups. Neither of us really wanted to do this. We just kind of fell into it. Coaching has been another very powerful thing in my life, and I see a lot of guys in Men's Group doing very well with coaching. A lot of guys in Men's Group have worked with you. Why is coaching so impactful for men? Why is it an important thing to consider, a tool in your tool belt, so to speak?
I think coaching is so powerful because no one really teaches any of this stuff. And I think first and foremost, we don't necessarily have the education to be able to handle everything that life is thrown at us. So, for example, if I want to learn about fitness, I could go and spend hundreds of hours on YouTube watching videos, and I could probably figure it out easy enough. And I could lose some weight if I wanted to lose weight or get a bit more in shape, go into YouTube. Or I could hire someone who actually knows exactly what I need and can actually just shine a light on it and give me the custom plan to actually help me accelerate the process. So instead of me spending all of that time, and I think we're all busy, we've all got stuff going on. Instead of spending all that time, I pay for the experience of the coach who just shows me exactly what to do or exactly where to look to actually help me solve the problem. I think the other side to coaching is I have the saying. I actually don't. It's not my saying. I learned it from Les Brown. Les Brown said, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame. And
True.
what a
I like that
coach
saying.
always gives you is objectivity, perspective, the things you can't see, because we all have things that are out of our awareness, things, blind spots, you might call them. We can't see it. And so what a coach has always done for me is they've just almost like held up a mirror. They've held up a mirror and they've helped me to see exactly what's really going on. And that's what's been super powerful for me as a coach. And then what I'd say finally is that just to make the distinction between therapy, counseling, and coaching. So what you typically experience, and there is often overlap as well. There's therapists that do some coaching and coaches that maybe have some experience in therapy. What you typically experience in therapy is that they will focus very much on the problem. And guys have come to me and they've said, we spent a lot of time talking about stuff and my past and how that made me feel, and all of that plays its part. And I'm not here in any way to discredit therapy. So they tend to focus on the problem, whereas coaching is about being future focused. And they very much focus on, okay, how can we move forward? What's the solution? Now, in saying that, in coaching, sometimes you will set an agreement with a client where they actually say, yep, I'm going to do this thing. And over the course of a couple of weeks, they keep on committing, but they're not doing it. At that point, we need to explore, well, what could be the cause of that? And here's the icing on the cake. Everything, you are a product of your past. So if you're
Yeah.
not doing the thing, it's probably because of something in your past.
Yes.
So what we tend to do as coaches is we will go and explore what that thing is that's getting in the way, that's causing you to see the world that way or believe something specific. And we will do what's called a reframe. We will shift it and help you to shift it. And
Yeah.
that allows you to accelerate and move forward towards your goals instead of feeling stuck or like you've got some kind of block that keeps you from doing the thing. And then finally, one last thing I'm going to say. One of the things I love about coaching, and people always mix this up, they always say, hey, give me some advice. Now, pure coaching, if we get down to pure coaching, I'm not a idealist in any way, because I think that when you have experience and wisdom to share, your clients want to get that. Pure coaching uses you. I'm not here how to tell you how to build an incredible relationship. I'm not here to tell you how to make all of the money you want or how to live your life. I will simply facilitate a conversation with you, and you already have all of the answers you need. And if not, if you don't have the resources available, you certainly have the ability to be resourcefulness in finding the resources that you need to actually create an extraordinary life for yourself.
Yeah, I love it. And as I mentioned to anybody who's listening, like Jay has, I've seen him in our men's groups for almost close to 2 years now, I think, Jay, and many of our members
Yeah,
have been
about
working
18
with you
months, I
and
think.
coaching.
18
So
months too.
yeah, yeah, that's great. And where can people find you if they're interested in seeing what you're all about or potentially working with you?
Yeah, so if people want to have a conversation with me or find out more about what I do, you can go to jwilliamscoaching.com. That's jwilliamscoaching.com. Or if you are a business owner or entrepreneur, that's typically who I find myself working with a lot, then there is a Facebook group called Six Figure Mindset Secrets for Entrepreneurs. I do have guys from Men's Group in there, and I'm not going to stop you from going in there if you don't run a business, because at the end of the day, I'm here to support you and add value to your life. And you join my Facebook group and take a load of value. I'm not gonna complain, because ultimately, what I really care about is that people get access to the help they need. And I think more importantly than anything is that you're open to getting the help. I spent a lot of time feeling like I need to go in on my own. And Sean certainly taught me through what he's doing with Men's Group and seeing all of the guys coming out and sharing, is that the quicker you can actually ask for help, the quicker you can start to create the things that you really want in your life, instead of settling and sitting on the things that you don't want, that don't make you happy and don't make you feel fulfilled.
Yeah. Well, Jay, thanks for everything you do. Thanks for helping men. Thanks for running our men's groups. Really appreciate it, buddy. And I look forward to having you back on here again soon to talk about some more mindset and emotional tips for men.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. Appreciate it.